When Vikram Anand was diagnosed with early-stage Parkinson's, his two children lived vastly different lives. His daughter, Priya, lived an 11-minute commute from her parents' front door. Her brother, Aman, lived 2 states away, having recently moved for a corporate promotion. Geography quickly dictated the terms of Vikram's care. Over the next 4 years, Priya assumed the grinding physical reality of the diagnosis. She managed the daily medication schedules, eventually moved into their guest bedroom for 14 months, and sacrificed 2 major client contracts to accommodate the demands of round-the-clock care. Aman visited the house exactly 4 times during those 4 years. He called frequently, and the conversations were genuinely warm. He loved his father, and those frequent phone calls projected the image of a deeply involved, supportive son. But geographical distance creates a quiet permission structure. Being 2 states away easily explains a physical absence during a 3 a.m. fall. Yet for Aman, that physical absence never meant surrendering any authority over decisions regarding their father's house, his medical care, or his money. During the final year of Vikram's life, Aman made one of his rare trips home. The visit was noticeably short and unusually tense. Later, while attending their father's funeral, Aman casually mentioned to Priya that he had used that specific trip to help their dad update some paperwork. Priya remembered the aftermath of that specific trip vividly. After Aman left, Vikram sat in his recliner, completely silent and withdrawn for several days. In the heavy haze of early grief, Priya assumed Aman's comment referred to routine administrative maintenance, a beneficiary form on a checking account, perhaps, or a minor update to a medical proxy. Exhaustion acts as a blinder. When you spend 4 years coordinating hospice nurses and managing decline, you assume your family members are operating with the same standard intentions. You do not anticipate a calculated maneuver happening in plain sight. 6 weeks after the funeral, Priya and her mother sat in the unfamiliar office of Gerald Whitcomb, a lawyer they had never met, but who Aman had recommended to Vikram the previous year. Whitcomb read the terms of the new will. The family house, owned outright for 31 years, was to be sold, with the proceeds split 70-30 in Aman's favor. Furthermore, Vikram's entire retirement account was left exclusively to Aman. The document contained a specific legal justification for this split. It stated that Priya had already received her share of the inheritance through years of, quote, room and board at their expense. Hearing this induces a distinct kind of vertigo. 4 years of lost income and canceled contracts and relentless physical caregiving had been legally rewritten by an absent sibling, permanently codified into the estate as a financial dependency. Looking across the lawyer's desk, Priya noticed her mother's reaction. She looked as entirely lost as Priya felt. The surviving spouse had been completely bypassed in this legal update. That evening, sitting at the kitchen table, where Priya had prepared thousands of meals and cups of tea over the last 4 years, she asked her mother a direct question about the new will. Her mother had never seen it. The only will she knew of had been drafted a decade earlier, splitting everything evenly. More importantly, she had not been asked to witness this new document, a glaring deviation for a couple who had witnessed every single legal document for each other over 31 years of marriage. When a new will drastically reallocates assets without the knowledge or signature of a spouse who lives in the exact same house, it moves past a family disagreement. It becomes a covert operation, and it leaves a chronological paper trail. Priya set aside her grief to begin a forensic investigation. She started with the only element she could completely control, her meticulously kept caregiving calendar. This timeline maps out the exact sequence of events Priya uncovered. It begins with Aman's short, tense visit. Exactly 11 days later, a new note appears, the date the new will was officially signed. Next, Priya requested the visitor logs from the assisted living facility, where her father had taken a brief respite stay. The logs showed a new entry dropping precisely onto the afternoon of Aman's visit. Gerald Whitcomb, the lawyer, visiting Vikram directly in his room. Finally, she pulled her father's neurological records for that exact week. The charts indicated his tremor medication had been adjusted twice. This specific dosage change was explicitly known to cause severe temporary confusion and impair judgment for several days. The mundane daily logs kept by a caregiver to ensure a parent stays alive can seamlessly become the exact forensic evidence needed to expose how that patient was exploited. The sequence was undeniable. An out-of-state son deployed a newly hired lawyer to an assisted living room, arriving precisely during a documented medical window of drug-induced confusion to quietly secure a completely new estate plan. The 11-day gap between that manipulation in the respite room and the final signature reveals the calculated patience involved. They waited for the acute confusion to pass, securing a signature on a document Vikram likely no longer fully understood. Priya looked at the timeline, the visitor logs, and the medical charts. She made a deliberate decision to remain entirely silent to her brother until every single thread of evidence was verified, pulled, and secured. The physical labor of caring for a sick parent ends when they pass away, but protecting them ultimately demands a ruthless administrative defense of the truth against the people willing to rewrite history for their own gain.
When you discover a sudden, secretive change to a parent's will, the first reaction is pure panic. You feel betrayed. You worry immediately about paying for your surviving parent's care. But sitting in that anger doesn't give you the tools to actually fight back. The strategy changes when you bring in a specialist. Frances Okonkwo is an elder law attorney who handles these exact disputes. Her first move in a case like this is to pull the focus completely away from sibling rivalry. This logic model lays out the two specific legal standards required to throw out a signed document. You have to prove that the person signing either lacked testamentary capacity, meaning they lacked the mental clarity to understand what they were signing, or that they were subjected to undue influence by someone who stood to benefit. Opposing lawyers can usually argue away a single pillar. A surprisingly good day or a surprisingly bad day can explain away an isolated medical note. But when you build evidence for both simultaneously, they interlock. You create a coherent timeline that a judge can actually follow. Winning an estate battle requires moving past moral judgments to build an objective architectural framework of facts. A judge relies on this clinical evidence rather than a family's emotional history. The construction starts in the discovery phase. Frances subpoenaed the complete file from Gerald Whitcomb, the estate lawyer who drafted the new will. His intake notes from the day the document was signed described an alert and oriented client. What those notes failed to mention, anywhere, was the client's advanced Parkinson's diagnosis or his current medication regimen. For an attorney dealing with an elderly client, assessing capacity in detail is a minimum requirement. Leaving those details out suggests either profound negligence or a deliberate choice to avoid creating a paper trail that might invite questions later. This timeline maps the will signing against medical records. The signing date lands exactly on day 11 of a Parkinson's medication adjustment. From that exact afternoon, the neurologist documented intermittent confusion. A nurse's report noted the father seemed unusually agreeable right as the brother visited. Family members will always have conflicting memories of how sharp a parent seemed on a given Tuesday, but intersecting clinical timelines eliminate that subjectivity entirely. They establish a definitive medical reality of a highly vulnerable patient. Knowing the father's mental state on the day of signing is only half the equation. You also need to establish what he actually wanted before the cognitive decline began. During discovery, the father's primary care physician of 20 years offered up chart notes from a routine psychosocial assessment taken 8 months before the new will was drafted. The doctor had documented an explicit offhand comment. The father wanted to make sure his daughter was overcompensated for the career sacrifices she made to care for him. 4 months later, the new will left her a modest insurance policy and practically nothing else. With the evidence assembled, you initiate the confrontation. When you call the sibling who orchestrated the changes, you ask them to explain the paperwork update, and then you stay completely silent. You let them recount their version of events from start to finish, completely uninterrupted. Once they finish laying out a story where everyone was clear-headed and fine, you read them the visitor logs. Next, the neurologist's notes. Finally, the primary care physician's chart. The objective data shatters their subjective timeline. The ensuing silence on the phone reflects a common reality in undue influence cases. When confronted with documented evidence, the personal narrative used to justify the new will simply collapses.
You take that evidentiary picture directly into a legal filing. Faced with a complete timeline of medical vulnerability and missing lawyer nuts, the opposing counsel will almost always recommend mediation rather than risking a trial they cannot defend. The resulting settlement immediately rolled back the suspicious changes, restoring the original 50-50 split of the retirement accounts. It also closed a dangerously vague loophole in the second will. The provisions for the family house were rewritten to explicitly protect the surviving mother's care needs, guaranteeing her access to assisted living funds whenever she needs them. The family dynamic does not magically repair itself after a legal threat. The relationship becomes recalibrated. You aren't completely estranged, but you establish firm boundaries built on the reality of what was proven on paper. Months later, an informal apology might follow, an admission that distance and resentment warped an internal sense of what was deserved. Whether you believe that apology or not is irrelevant. An apology cannot retroactively fix a bank account or fund a nursing home stay. The meticulous documentation is what actually prevented the permanent injustice. Screaming about unfairness into an empty room accomplishes nothing. When family emotions fail, a methodical, organized timeline of evidence is the only tool capable of forcing accountability and restoring reality.